Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, in your absence at the last round of Senate estimates, I asked your colleagues to reflect whether or not, with the benefit of hindsight, they felt the AFP had moved quickly enough and put enough resources behind the growing anti-Semitism problem. This is in November last year, and it was before the firebombing of the Yadas synagogue. It was before the targeting of Mr Rivchin's home, former home. It was before the targeting of a childcare centre. It was before the discovery of the caravan at Dural. I wanted to give you the opportunity to reflect on that and whether you think over the last 15 or 16 months since the 7th of October, the AFP moved quickly enough and firmly enough on this problem.
Yeah, I think, as you're aware, Senator, we have I think, a world-class joint counter-terrorism team structure that is in every state and territory. And that's the lens that we look through. And that joint counter-terrorism team has been in operation for many years and been very successful at being able to counter terrorist threats. So I think from a structural point of view, certainly we have the infrastructure in place. And I think also, and I've said this statement in the public as well, around the fact that we're now getting in behind some of these entities which are linking to organised crime. And I've said crime as a service has become a serious threat in this country. And I'm happy to explain that and have others explain, which I think you're aware of, what crime as a service is. So, and as you know, the complexity of the world we live in now, a lot of our high harm targets are not in Australia. So this presents a real challenge for us onshore and both offshore, especially if you're based yourself in countries that are hostile to Australia. So more and more we're having to work out innovative ways of how do we go after a target that's living in a hostile country that we don't have any agreement with to work with, to be able to achieve those objectives. And what I would say is we have had some success in some of those countries that traditionally were hostile, using different techniques and also a different methodology of how we're deploying our people overseas. So I don't want to go into all those operational details, but what the message we're trying to send is to organised crime in particular is we're not going to stop and we'll hunt you down. If you're posing a threat to our citizens and our country, we'll come after you, and we've proven that with some of Australia's most serious threats where we're able to push into different countries and actually successfully arrest, one of Australia's top targets. I don't want to mention his name, but you probably would know who I'm talking about. I think the other thing, if I can just quickly say, is the threat of outlaw motorcycle gangs has continued and, if anything, got stronger globally. And they are a global enterprise that are now involved in any illicit activity that generates profit for them, and that they don't have to pay tax and like normal citizens. So that continues to be a threat, and that's why we do most of our operations now done jointly, either Commonwealth or with state as well.
That's interesting context, but it doesn't directly address the question that I asked, which is, did the AFP act early enough and firmly enough on the anti-Semitism crisis? And let me give you some specific examples to illustrate it. I and others have welcomed the establishment of Operation Advana. I think it had a deterrent effect almost immediately. The week-in, week-out display of listed terrorist symbols like Hezbollah flags and Hamas flags virtually stopped after Advana and after AFP made that statement. But by that point, it had been happening for months. So shouldn't something like Operation Advana have been launched earlier when I and others have been urging you to act on this crime type?
Senator, perhaps if I could take us back to just after October 7, 2023, where the AFP did stand up Operation Larimar in the days after, and that ran through for a number of months, and that was a 24/7 incident coordination centre with Intel Cell, Operation Cell, Investigation Cell attached to it to address what we expected to come out of that conflict. Operation Larimar was then rolled into our business as usual counter-terrorism and special investigations command. You're then aware, and we were obviously investigating matters through our CTSI command. You've obviously mentioned now Operation Advana, which you are aware was created to particularly address the protest activity in Melbourne on the 29th of September, but not just that activity, but that was the majority of it. And then, of course, we now have Operation Avalite, which was commenced in December.
I'll come to that in a minute, but I just want to finish on Advana first. I mean, the 29th of September was a particularly shocking instance of so many Hezbollah flags, but it was not the first instance of terrorist flags being displayed at these rallies. In fact, I think it was in July or August that year that I tabled documents in the Senate which showed examples of Hamas and Al-Qassam brigades logos that were displayed at rallies, and I think actually some of those people have subsequently been charged, which is very welcome. But why wasn't Operation Advana started earlier in response to those first displays of terrorist symbols? It's really a question for the Commissioner who's responsible for leading the organisation, directing resources.
Senator, what I would say to that, as I've explained, our CTSI command is very well structured and positioned to investigate those matters. You're right, we did stand up Operation Advana in response to that protest, but we were investigating similar matters prior to that. You will also be aware that we were working with new legislation and within the legislation that we've been provided and some of the challenges that we've been on the record talking through, but we have had some good results in relation to prohibited symbols specifically.
I hesitate to interrupt, Deputy Commissioner, but we're running way over time tonight, and I'm concerned our time will be limited. So I do understand those points you make. I just reiterate that the first charges for prohibited hate symbols did not occur until after Operation Advana was stood up, and had it been stood up earlier, perhaps that wouldn't have been the case. On the other example which you cited, and again I direct this to the Commissioner, Operation Avalite was a very welcome response to the Adass Israel synagogue bombing, but it should not have required the bombing and firebombing of a synagogue to stand up a special task force. It was already clear anti-Semitism was out of control, and the Jewish community had been crying out for stronger law enforcement prior to that. With the benefit of hindsight, don't you think it would have been a good thing to have that in place earlier?
No, I think we acted appropriately, and I think our results have shown that. You've also got to understand we operate in a two-tiered system, which is what I was talking about. The state police have certain responsibility, and that there's at times where they may want to investigate certain matters, and they can even lay Commonwealth charges, which I think they've been doing as well. So I think it's probably not as easy as what most people think about just going out and arresting someone. First of all, you're taking their liberty away. Second of all, you have to have evidence and reasonable grounds to believe that they've committed an offence. And that sometimes has meant we have had to obtain that video footage. What's the source of that video footage? We have to go through our forensics procedures. There's a lot there that you have to do. Yes, you can make decisions on the spot, but that's also what we call the Office of Constable, where that's independent of me. The only time that I, as Commissioner, can direct any of my officers to arrest anyone is actually in a public order situation where there's a riot, for example. And even that is you have to be very careful with that. So there are independent decision makers, and some you will get. We are a broad church. Sometimes some officers may not think the threshold has been met. Some others would say yes, it has been. It's not as easy as perhaps what's portrayed on television.
No one should suggest that your job is easy, and I'm certainly not suggesting that. But I'm just interested to know if there's been any reflection. If you can honestly say, with the benefit of hindsight, seeing how out of control this problem has become in our country and how distressing it's been for Australians, that there's nothing that you would have done differently.
I think the challenge we've had was we've had to respect those state jurisdictions and what their needs and wishes are and their strategies. And then we've had to work with every state differently.